In a solemn American tradition, at the symbolic moment when executive power was transferred between administrations, the former president, Barack Obama, warned the current president, Donald Trump, that the most dangerous foreign policy problem facing the United States is North Korea's continuing development of nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles. Lines in the sand, as it were, are now being drawn. President Trump warns that North Korea will never be allowed to operationalize an intercontinental missile. China warns of consequences if the U.S. deploys its THAAD anti-missile system in South Korea. And what about an increasingly assertive Japan? Is a new arms race in Northeast Asia about to begin? Why has the situation deteriorated so badly? Can anything be done? My approach is to present the situation honestly and starkly. No sugarcoating, no platitudes, no unfounded hopes. That's closer to China. On March 6, the DPRK launched 4 missiles. Later the same day, 2 THAAD launcher trucks arrived at the U.S. Air Base in South Korea for deployment. South Korea and the U.S. claim that the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense, or THAAD, is a necessary move to counter a growing threat from the DPRK. The DPRK insisted that it would pursue its nuclear weapons and ballistic missile programs. Visiting U.S. ally South Korea, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson was blunt. "Let me be very clear," he said. "The policy of strategic patience has ended. All options are on the table," Tillerson said.
If they elevate the threat of their weapons program to a level that we believe requires action, that option is on the table.
Tensions on the Korean peninsula have escalated. To discern ways of thinking in China and the U.S., I speak with 3 leaders. With me in the studio is Ambassador Su Ge, a career diplomat who is president of the China Institute of International Studies, and General Zhu Zhenghu, the former dean of China's National Defense University of the People's Liberation Army. On the phone from Denver is Ambassador Christopher Hill, the former head of the U.S. delegation to the 6-party talks with the DPRK, North Korea. He is now dean of the Joseph Corbell School of International Studies at the University of Denver. Recently, U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson made 2 remarks that seem to change U.S. position. Number one, he said that Washington's strategic patience has ended. Secondly, he seemed to put a military option, particularly a preemptive strike, if the U.S. determines that the DPRK, North Korea's intercontinental missile program, had reached some operational stage. Ambassador Su, do you recognize these remarks as something new and potentially destabilizing?
What concerns me is that the nuclear issue and the situation in Korean Peninsula has been an issue and a problem or quandary that has not been solved, that has been left out from the old Cold War years and hot war years. And that whatever U.S. position, well, if there is any change, my personal concern is the consequences. For instance, it's easier to say preemptive strike than what about the consequences? How much are you willing to put in? The two are just like 2 trains speed up. Are you ready for a head-on crash?
General Zhu, as a military man, how do you view the potential of military action in that area? What would be China's reaction?
I think on this issue we have to be patient, because the military action will not bring any benefits to any country in this region. And I don't think military action can resolve the nuclear issue and change the regime in this region. And also they have some nuclear devices. Therefore, a military action or preemptive strike against the DPRK. If it's not very successful, I think it will be a disaster, not only for Korean Peninsula, but also for East Asia and even for the whole world.
Chris, there are a few people in the world who are as close to the DPRK U.S. Relations over time as you have been. How do you interpret Secretary Tillerson's recent remarks?
Well, I think to a great extent, any new administration coming in Washington has to show a certain differentiation from the previous administration, especially when there's a broad perception in the United States that the policies of the previous administration with regard to North Korea have failed. I don't think anyone in America wants to see a military solution, but at the same time, they don't want a solution that simply allows North Korea to continue to develop their nuclear weapons, to put those nuclear weapons onto deliverable devices, that is missiles, and ultimately threaten our allies and the United States itself. And I think it's really going to be up to Secretary Tillerson to try to convince the Chinese over the months and maybe even years of the Trump administration that the United States is not interested in causing problems with China. It's interested in dealing with a threat from North Korea. And finally, I'd like to say that when you look at the overall atmosphere of dealing with North Korea, especially this latest regime, this Kim Jong-un regime, the United States is seeing a person who is not interested in what Americans say, seems to be not interested in what the Chinese say, and seems to want to do whatever he wants, wherever he wants. So I think it's important to understand there is a lot of pessimism coming from Washington, but also a sense of urgency that this issue needs to be dealt with.
General Chu, Ambassador Hill says that strategic patience has been tried for years, if not decades, and it hasn't worked. You advocate strategic patience to continue. That certainly seems rational. How long shall we wait?
I don't think there is a dead time for that sort of things, but I think we should end our patience on the negotiation. I think we should restart negotiations with DPRK as soon as possible.
But
Either on this in the six-party talks or in the bilateral ones. For example, the DPRK has always advocated to have bilateral talks with the United States. I don't know why the Americans reject this sort of proposal. But I believe that there is one fact, that is the longer we postpone the talk, the more mature the nuclear technologies and the missile technologies will be in DPRK. So this is a fact. Therefore, we have to keep them on the table so that we can put pressure on that and we can put forward our requests on the DPRK, for, not necessarily to address the denuclearization, but we can freeze it and we can prevent it to proliferate it, and we can also ask them to not to weaponize it. So these are very important. So without talks, I don't think we can achieve those objectives.
Ambassador Hill, on the other hand, the suggestion that the U.S. Enter into bilateral talks with the DPRK, North Korea, on its surface sounds reasonable. Why does the U.S. reject that?
Well, first of all, the U.S. has had bilateral discussions with the North Koreans in the past. The U.S. has had discussions bilaterally with 6 parties, with 4 parties. I don't think this is a problem of format. I think the problem is that in September 2005, North Korea agreed that it would abandon all of its nuclear programs. In return, other countries agreed to do certain things, including energy and economic assistance, a no hostile policy, meaning no attacks against North Korea. A lot of things are in that September 2005 document, And yet, in the beginning of the Obama administration, North Korea said, we no longer agree to what we have agreed in the six-party process. So now to go back and talk to the North Koreans on the basis of what? On the basis of North Korea not agreeing to anything that they agreed to in the past strikes people as a little fruitless, because to talk with someone who seems to forget what he agreed to the day before is to have, I think, a very difficult negotiating process. If the North Koreans have something to say to us, they know our address, they may even know our email address, they can tell us if they have something to say. But right now, their only interest in talk is to be a nuclear country talking to another nuclear country, and that's not a basis for talk.
Our new president, Donald Trump, has tweeted recently that North Korea is behaving very badly. That's a phrase he applies to many different types of entities. They have been playing with the United States, he says. And then he adds, China has done little to help. Do you agree with that, Ambassador Su?
And I remember earlier during the campaign, President Trump also tweeted that he wouldn't mind, to the effect that he wouldn't mind invite the North Korean leaders to come to the States, and then they can talk about the things and while eating a hamburger. So I wonder whether that remarks he still remembers, he's still preparing to do this or not. So what I'm saying is that we need to have sanctions. We need to let them know that to have the nuclear weaponry in the present international situation wouldn't make their country safer. Now China said, what about as a first step, both sides, you retreat one step or half a step. What about the two moratorium, that means two suspensions? North Korea, you stop, suspend your tests. And what about the Americans and South? You adjourn the military drills.
Why does the U.S. Reject that, what seems like a mutual step back? Why does the U.S. reject that out of hand?
Well, first of all, I'd like to make the point that if President Trump were to invite Kim Jong-un for a hamburger or whatever, I think we ought to bear in mind that not even the Chinese government has invited Kim Jong-un. So there are problems with such invitations. There are especially problems with invitations when you don't really know if the other side is prepared to have a serious discussion. As you know, any summit meeting has to be very well prepared with the outcomes understood. And we have none of that with respect to Kim Jong-un. And I suspect the Chinese have a similar problem with Kim Jong-un. So I don't think this situation is ready for that type of quote-unquote dialogue. With respect to this step-back issue, I must be very clear about what the U.S. ROK exercises are. They have been going on every year for decades. They are not aggressive exercises. They're not exercises aimed at attacking North Korea. They are exercises aimed at defending South Korea. In the meantime, North Korea's nuclear program is not designed to protect anybody. It's designed to threaten people and to essentially put North Korea in contravention with every UN Security Council resolution. And so to say one action that is completely illegal, that is these missile tests, should be suspended in return for an action that is perfectly legal and perfectly normal and perfectly within the context of a bilateral alliance, that would have to be suspended. Really, I'm sorry, it just isn't a step back that is going to enable anything positive to happen.
There is any possibility, under any conditions, that the DPRK, North Korea, would give up their nuclear weapons?
I think it all depends on the security environment of the DPRK. If they believe that they have the security guarantee from other major powers, I think it's quite likely for them to give up the nuclear option. But now I don't think it's possible. For example, the United States withdraw its nuclear weapons and do not hold those large-scale exercises against the DPRK, etc. And other countries like Russia or China can jointly provide the security guarantee. I think it's quite likely. But nowadays, I think on a lot of issues, different countries have got different interpretations. For example, the military exercise by the United States and ROK, in the interpretation of DPRK, that's a war rehearsal, and it's a threat to itself. Therefore, they need to protect themselves, and that justifies the development of the nuclear weapons of their own, because they believe nuclear option is the best option for defending the national security of DPRK, and it might be the most economic one in protecting or safeguarding the national security for this country.
Culture Express. See the world in color.
THAAD missiles have an estimated maximum range of about 200 kilometers, which only reaches the outskirts of the capital, Seoul. But the system's radar, in certain configurations, can monitor areas with a range of up to 3,000 kilometers. That covers all of the DPRK and small parts of China and Russia. And as South Korea moves forward with the THAAD missile defense battery, neighboring Japan is also considering its own deployment of the U.S. anti-missile system. General Zhu, when I read the Chinese media, there seems to be a moral equivalent between what the DPRK, North Korea, is doing with developing nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles, and the U.S. introducing the THAAD anti-missile system into South Korea. And to an American, that apparent moral equivalent looks ridiculous. How can you justify that?
This sort of thought is not capable of protecting ROK and the U.S. military bases in ROK. It is because the distance is so short. It's impossible to have the high altitude flight of the missiles from DPRK. Number two, I think we will have to take into consideration of the history. In history, in 1972, United States and Russia concluded the ABM Treaty. It's a very, very important stabilizer for balance of power between the United States and the Soviet Union. And this is very important. Actually, deployment of THAAD system, in my understanding, is not totally intended against this sort of missile system. Of course, to be very frank, the missile of THAAD cannot produce any threat to China's military deterrent forces. But its radar system, especially the X-band radar, which has a long range of detection. Of course, you can detect the missile launch from China with the satellite. But this system can tell a decoy from the real warhead. And that is a very serious challenge and threat to the credibility of China's strategic deterrence. And therefore, I think it will further deteriorate or break the balance of power in this region and jeopardize the stability in this region. Therefore, we Chinese are pretty much against this sort of deployment.
What is the ideal situation for the Korean Peninsula, particularly DPRK, from China's point of view? General Zhu, if you had an ideal world to project forward, 3-5 years from now, from China's perspective, what would it look like?
I think the best way is that the DPRK is to follow China's way of reform and opening to the outside. In this way, they can develop their own economy, and they can also improve the relations with outsider on the periphery of Korean DPRK and with the United States, and that will serve the interests of not only the government of DPRK but also the people in DPRK. And of course, I don't think the military option is the ideal option for DPRK. This is a challenge and a threat not only to the United States, but also to those countries on its periphery, including China. To be very frank, China is might be the most sincere country to seek resolution to the nuclear issue in DPRK.
Why do you say the most sincere versus the South or versus the U.S.? Are you implying an underlying hidden motivation that the U.S. may have? Why is China more sincere about trying to resolve it than the U.S.?
It is because China really takes it as a threat to China's national security. Number two, if you look at history, there is window of opportunity. For example, in 1994, there is a nuclear framework agreement. Actually, the Cato countries did not provide the materials and oil and the light water reactor to DPRK in time. If these sort of promised things are provided to DPRK, I don't think DPRK would have tore up the agreement and withdraw from NPT. So there was opportunity, but unfortunately, the countries, especially the United States, did not fulfill its promise.
Understood. Ambassador Su, from your perspective, you've also said that we should talk. What specifically should you talk about? I mean, I hear these generalities from both sides. I agree it should be in private, but I mean, here we are. Offer some specific suggestions that people in the U.S. could say, that's a good idea.
Now we intensify according to United Nations resolution. We have a unified, synchronized action of sanction. At the same time, while you tighten sanctions, you need to show them or tell them that what's the correct way, I mean, to North Koreans. We hope that if you really put all options on the table, not only the tough military solutions, otherwise, even if you go to you use the so-called brinkmanship, saying that war would happen even tonight. And I doubt whether that would just intimidate, the North Koreans to the negotiation table. I thought that we all have both ways, both the tough and the soft ways.
It was reported that the DPRK government launched missiles at the beginning of what in China is a very important time, which is the annual meetings of the what they call two sessions, the National People's Congress and the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference. And some interpreted that as a way the DPRK said to China, be careful what you do because we're going to protect our own interests. And it was a message sent to China that you also are in our range. Is that a fair comment?
I think that anybody who has said those remarks saying that China has not done enough, China is dancing with the imperialists, U.S. imperialists. Well, apparently they are not happy.
Said by the DPRK media.
Because it seems that China's efforts have not been well understood, and then China has been put between the hammer and the anvil. So I think that China is a responsible country. We also want to see actions. If we go back and think that why in 2005 North Koreans agreed to give up their program, and then the international community and with the United States and China, we all agreed with the principles. The North Koreans would stop completely, and then verifiably, and then irreversibly. So the CVI, I think that these principles needs to be stick to, and while at the same time we tell them that negotiation is the only way out.
Chris, for the North Korean media to accuse China of dancing with the U.S. imperialists, isn't that a wonderful compliment for what China has done?
It's beautiful, but I think life is too short to read North Korean propaganda. So I wouldn't worry too much about it. And as for the North Koreans firing missiles during this important period in China, I think it just reinforces the point that North Korea is conducting a military testing program, and they don't care what the rest of us think. But I thought it was important for Ambassador Su to mention some of the elements of that six-party joint statement of September 19th. And I think it's important that we all continue to honor the elements that we agreed to, so that we cannot expect North Korea to honor its agreement if the rest of us don't honor what we did. And we did a lot in terms of trying to create a situation which was favorable to denuclearization. So I think we need to keep that option on the table should the North Koreans ever want to come back.
What are the specific strategic interests of each of the major parties?
Number one is the stability. And stability serves the interests of China and also other countries. Number two is the denuclearization. Number three is the improvement of the relations between DPRK and other countries. These are very important for China.
Chris, from your view, the strategic interests of each of the parties that you've dealt with?
I think, number one, from the United States perspective, is peace and security on the Korean Peninsula, and to honor our treaty obligations to the Republic of Korea. I think a close second, however, is to maintain the really quality and credibility of the non-proliferation system in the world.
Ambassador Su.
Peace, development is the common denominator and the convergence of interests of all parties. But provided that the Korean Peninsula has to be nuclear free. And as for how to reach that goal, diplomatic means. So to sum up, we need to keep all the doors shut while leave a little window open, that is negotiations.
I start with realism. Pyongyang will never give up its nuclear weapons. They believe they have the ultimate defense against regime change. Many in the West blame China. China asserts that it is abiding by the UN resolutions and imposing sanctions. Moreover, China does not control the DPRK, and it's the U.S. threat of regime change that drives the DPRK. No one here doubts that China is deeply displeased by its neighbors' military adventures, just as it is with THAAD radar sweeping over the border. The last thing China wants, with all its own economic and social challenges, is conflict on the Korean Peninsula. But it seems the choice is between bad and worse. Bad is the DPRK developing weapons of mass destruction and disrupting regional economic development. Worse is the collapse of the DPRK, with millions of refugees pouring over the border into China, another socialist country disappearing, and the unpleasant prospect of the American military on China's border. It's not for me to offer solutions, which would anyway only be platitudes. I stress the complexity and the severity of the problem. That's closer to China.